What's up everybody, thanks for checking out the video. I'm Luke, this is a Subaru only channel. It's a channel where all I do is Subaru builds and race Subaru vehicles and motorsport events. It's a DIY themed channel where I walk you guys through how to work on your Subarus and hopefully get you guys out on the racetrack to do a little racing of your own. In today's video, I'm taking a closer look at how to determine if you need to replace your timing belt and those pulleys. Let's check it out. Okay, here's the engine and the timing components that we're going to be taking a closer look at. This engine is from a 2000 Subaru Forester. It's a 2.5 liter single overhead cam engine. It had a bad head gasket, and I'm doing a build series where I'm replacing the head gasket and all the steps associated with that repair. So make sure you check out some of my older videos if you're interested in any of those DIY topics. Okay, where do you start when you need to determine whether or not you need to replace one of these timing belts and those timing belt accessories like this cog pulley? The first step is knowing the OEM recommended replacement interval. For these Subaru engines, the replacement interval for the timing belts and the accessories is approximately 100,000 miles. Don't quote me on it, but I think it's 105,000 miles to be exact. Either way, it's about 100,000 miles. So if you know that engine hasn't had a new timing belt or any of those accessory components replaced in the last 100,000 or plus miles, you know it's probably due. However, there'll be situations where you really aren't sure. Like in my situation, I bought this Subaru Forester from a girl who told me that it had a blown head gasket, but she also told me that the timing belt and the accessory components, like all the pulleys and the water pump, had been replaced within the last year. Like always, she didn't have any paperwork on it. I was able to get a hold of her dad, and he said he remembers explicitly replacing the water pump, but he wasn't 100% certain of all the other components and the timing belt. The car that this engine came out of has about 135 or 140,000 miles. So the first thing I think about is whether or not all these components are original OEM Subaru components. If the timing belt or any of the accessory pulleys are not Subaru OEM components, you can have a pretty high confidence that they were replaced around 100,000 or 110,000 miles. So that's the first thing. Are any of these components non-OEM Subaru components? And the answer of this engine is no. So that doesn't help me at all. These components could have been replaced with OEM components at the correct interval, or these can be the original components that were put on from the factory from day one, and they all have 135 or 140,000 miles on it. In that case, they definitely all need to be replaced. So where do we go from here? In this situation, you'd probably just want to play it safe and replace that timing belt and all those accessory pulleys and know that you have another 100,000 miles and you're good to go. But for this video, I'm going to go ahead and take a closer look at how you can verify that those accessory pulleys are definitely bad and they definitely need to be replaced. Okay, here's a close-up view of that 2.5 liter single overhead cam Subaru Forester engine. We're going to walk through each one of these components and we're going to take a closer look at whether or not they're still functioning correctly. It all really starts at the crankshaft and this cog right here that's key to the crankshaft. This is where all that rotational force is transmitted to your timing belt, which then drives all the other accessories. That's one reason they have this timing belt shield above the cog. This shield is here to prevent the timing belt from skipping any teeth on this cog. While we're talking about this cog, I'll also point out there's a little arrow stamped in this cog. There's also a little line stamped in this cog. And then on the back of the cog, there's a little line stamped on one of the teeth on the back of the cog. That line that's stamped on the teeth on the back of the cog is what you want to line up with this little mark on your engine block before you take off your camshaft belt. Okay, I've unbolted that crankshaft shield so I can remove the shield and I can show you where that timing mark is in the back that you line up with that line on your engine block. That's where the two block case halves come together. That ensures that your pistons are in the center of their bores and they're not at top dead center for any of the pistons. Because if they were at top dead center, if any of the valves were to open while the piston was at top dead center, your valves could potentially contact your piston and you could damage one of your valves. So make sure that cog is rotated to that position before you take off that timing belt, and then inspect that cog wheel and make sure none of the teeth are damaged, and make sure you replace it if any of them are. The next component, this guy right here. These tensioners should also be replaced about every 100,000 miles. It's designed to hold tension on your timing belt when your engine is running. In that way, with this little guy, the timing belt can stretch during that 100,000 mile service interval, and while the timing belt is stretching, the same amount of pressure and tension can be kept on that timing belt, which drives all these other accessories. When you're checking this tensioner, the thing you're going to want to check for is fluid weeping out of the top of the cylinder bore. I'm going to pull the camera in for a closer look. and show you guys what this one looks like. Okay, here's a close-up of that hydraulic timing belt tensioner. As you can clearly see here, I've already compressed that tensioning rod, which I'm pointing out right here with my screwdriver. Under normal operating conditions, this little rod will be fully extended and will be applying tension to this round, hardened steel insert right here in the block. When that rod is applying tension on the little steel insert, that pushes this pulley down, and when that pulley is being pushed down, it's applying tension to that timing belt. What controls the force of that rod is a pressurized fluid chamber inside this timing belt tensioner. That pressurized fluid chamber cannot be recharged, and if it starts losing pressure or leaking, then that tensioner is bad and it has to be replaced. Basically, the way these work is that fluid chamber is under high pressure, and that high pressure fluid goes through a bunch of little orifices and applies pressure to a piston that pushes this little rod up into that steel insert. That little piston has several little seals inside, and when those seals start going bad, you're going to start seeing fluid from that reservoir inside leaking out into the top area of this piston bore. So, when you're evaluating whether or not one of these tensioners is bad, one of the first things you want to look at is whether or not you see a lot of oil accumulating in this area. Let's take a closer look at this tensioner. Okay, from this view, I can clearly see that there's a lot of oil that's leaked out into that upper chamber. A lot of crud and a lot of gunk is kind of sticking to that oil, which tells me that those seals on that piston of this hydraulic tensioner have probably failed, and this tensioner needs to be replaced. Okay, so this tensioner will definitely need to be replaced. One thing I'll also mention is that when you compress this little rod in your tensioner, make sure you do it over a very slow interval. In the manufacturer's specs, it calls out for at least a 60-second interval of slow compression of that rod before you can put this little pin in through that rod and hold it fully compressed. So if you're going to compress that rod, make sure you do it very slowly and take at least 60 seconds to compress it fully. Okay, the next thing we're going to take a closer look at are these accessory pulleys. These accessory pulleys have little bearings inside, and those little bearings are enclosed by steel or composite races, which are basically the enclosures that surround the bearings. As these pulleys get used over tens of thousands of miles and hundreds of thousands of miles, those cages that surround the bearings get more and more distorted and allow for more and more slop between those bearings and the cages that are holding them. That's why you'll get those skateboard sounding bearings that sound like they'll go forever, because those bearings actually have a ton of slop in them and a lot of crud in them. Okay, let's take a closer look at how these sound. You can hear a little bit of grinding in them. They definitely sound a little bit worn, but not too bad either. I'm going to replace them just to be safe. Okay, now let's look at the lower pulley. This pulley sees a lot less force, and as a matter of fact, it's a single bearing pulley, and this one is actually a double bearing pulley, which can take a lot more force. Let's take a look at this one. I hear a little bit of grinding. It doesn't spin too much. Definitely going to replace this one. Okay, let's move over to this cog pulley. This one also has bearings and a cage that encloses the bearings, but this one has cogs, as you can see. And because this one has teeth on it, if this pulley fails, it'll definitely snap your timing belt, which could easily cause those valves to tap the top of those pistons and bend those valves, which is the last thing you want to have happen, because that could cost several $1,000s to repair. Let's take a look at how this guy sounds. I hear a little bit of grinding in there, doesn't spin too much, doesn't have a whole lot of slop in it. Comparing the slop in this one to the slop in this upper pulley, you can hear a lot of slop in this one. Very little slop in this one. Of course, this one has a lot less force that's being applied to it. This pulley, which has the most force, actually has the most slop in it, and probably has the loudest sounding grinds. This one, oh, that one sounds about just as bad. This one also needs to be replaced. Now let's take a look at this water pump. The water pump actually spins really smoothly and has zero slop at all. So zero play in the bearing. It has zero grind in the bearing, and I can turn it and it smells very smooth like butter. And this water pump definitely feels different than all these other pulleys as far as the amount of wear that's taken place on the bearings. So I'm going to go ahead and believe the owner, because this water pump really feels virtually new, and leave this water pump, but replace all the other pulleys and replace the timing belt. Alright, I'm going to wrap it up there for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. This has been a video on timing belts and timing belt accessories, and how you can evaluate whether or not you need to replace that timing belt and those timing belt accessory pulleys. We talked about how those bearings are designed and how those tensioners are designed, and if those bearings spin like skateboard wheels, you definitely want to replace them. And with that tensioner, if there's any fluid leaking out of that upper portion of the piston, then you know it's likely leaking and you need to replace that tensioner as well. As you saw in this video, I'm definitely going to be replacing the timing belt and all the pulleys. I'm also going to be replacing that hydraulic tensioner assembly. So stay tuned for the installation of a new timing belt accessory kit on this Forester engine in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it brought you some value. I'm Luke. This is a Subaru Only channel. Again, thank you so much for checking out the video, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. If you're curious about anything or if you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks. Later.